And joining us now, MS Now reporter Alex Tabbitt, who's been talking to veterans in Miami. Michael Steele, General Barry McCaffrey, Peter Baker, and Kian Tajbakhsh are still here with us. Alex, tell us, what was their reaction to that?
Well, Antonio, we've been hearing a varied reaction, a mixed reaction from many of the veterans who are here at American Legion Post 31. There are about 170 veterans who frequent this watering hole. Veterans from the Marine Corps, from the Air Force, from the U.S. Navy, from the Coast Guard, and from the Army. 170 different vets and their family members who come here to talk about politics, to talk about life, to share their opinions. And they have a bunch of different opinions on this war and on the president. I want to introduce you to Ed Gorman. Ed, you're an Air Force vet. You told me you voted for President Trump 3 times.
I did.
What do you make of the press conference that we just watched and the details that we learned about this rescue mission?
I really didn't learn a whole lot more than I already knew. They threw out some numbers, which I didn't know about. But other than real details as to how this came about, I didn't really learn a whole lot.
And Ed, you told me that if you were a reporter in that press conference, you would want to know what the goal of this war is. Did you get any light on that question?
No. No, I did not.
Well, Ed, thank you so much. And I also want to introduce you to Rick Shemek. Rick is an Air Force vet as well. He's also the commander here. Rick, we heard President Trump being asked about blowing up civilian infrastructure, the bridges and the power plants, and he argued that's not a war crime. I mean, what do you make of President Trump's rhetoric on that issue? Do you think that is the way the commander-in-chief should be conducting himself in this war?
I'm totally against it. It's a war crime. I mean, how do you win a war by destroying the country? It's just, he even said it. It would take years to rebuild the infrastructure that he wants to blow up tomorrow. So let's hope they negotiate and this never happens.
And Rick, I also heard when Secretary Hegseth was praising President Donald Trump about this rescue mission, saying that this rescue mission couldn't have been done without him. I heard you grumble, here we go again. What do you make of Secretary Hegseth and his leadership right now?
It's the same as before. He's a cheerleader. He's a cheerleader. But I was impressed by General Kane and by them telling us and CIA the details of the rescue. I was very impressed. That was a very American thing to do.
Well, Rick, thank you so much. As you can hear, Antonia, there's patriotism. There's also a lot of questions that a lot of these veterans are still asking, are still wondering as this war continues on to its 2nd month. Antonia?
Incredible reporting, Alex. Thank you. Michael, Mr. Chairman, I want to go to you and get your reaction to what we just learned there from the veterans that Alex Tabbitt was talking to.
Look, you have to have mad respect for our veterans. I think they were honest in their assessment. I think they were correct in their assessment. We have not learned anything new in terms of what the end game is. Again, the goalposts have moved. We'll see what happens tomorrow. We don't know or can confirm how deeply they are in negotiations with the Iranians. This is the president saying this. What are we hearing from the Iranians? Are they at the table? Who's at the table? Who's in the room? And what's going to happen in the next 24 hours? All still big questions. But I think the veterans really put their finger on it. I mean, you don't win a war by blowing up the infrastructure. You don't win the war by killing civilians. Those are war crimes. And what Donald Trump is talking about, from my perspective, comes from an individual who has a sort of a video game view of how all this should play out, and for him will play out. But the reality on the ground is very different. And I think earlier, to General McCaffrey's point and others, about the disclosure of sort of methods and sources for how our military performs. Donald Trump likes to brag. He likes to brag to show that, oh, I'm in the room and I know stuff you don't know. So let me tell you stuff you don't know. Well, you know what, Mr. President? Some of that stuff you should just keep your mouth shut on, because we don't need to know it. Because if we know it, then that means our enemies know it. And the next time a service member goes down the result could be very, very different because they know now your methods.
General, I want to go to you to get your reaction to the president disclosing some of that methodology, but also just more broadly to the fact that we're approaching this deadline tomorrow night. He has doubled down on it, not walked it back at all. He used the term back to the Stone Ages. Again, he described the entire country as potentially being taken out all in one night. He described every power plant burning and exploding. He described different timelines, whether it would take 20 years potentially for them to rebuild or even 100 years for them to rebuild their country after what he is thinking of doing to them. General, are we at a precarious moment here?
Well, that's for sure. I think we're in great peril as a nation. The civilian leadership, in the absence of input from Congress, is leaving us at the whims of policy by dictate. But look, backing off on that press conference, it seems to me that General Kane's outline of the rescue of this downed flyer was professional. It was complex. It was daring. It was successful. It's a comment on the professionalism of the United States Air Force, the CIA, the joint JSOC forces that went into the ground. Absolutely magnificent. And it is common. We always go after our missing in action. So that was good. And the rest of the conference, two comments. One was the president sounds a little bit unhinged, jumping from one subject to another. It's somewhat of a babble factor, anger, attacking the media in the room, attacking former presidents. Astonishing to hear it. The other thought, I got to tell you, I've been in thousands of meetings in my life, business, military, politicians, not-for-profit. I've never heard a group of people who are so apple-kissing, groveling in their veneration of the leader, except possibly Kim Jong-un. It's really embarrassing as a professional soldier for me to see that.
Kian, I want to go to you next because you are an Iranian American. I can't really imagine what it would be like to hear someone saying they want to send my country back to the Stone Ages, the prospect of 100 years worth of work to rebuild, wanting to have every power plant up in flames. For you, what was going through your mind as you were listening to this press conference, seeing the president's rhetoric and his posturing?
Well, Antonia, I think the first thing that struck me when I heard that was I was not hearing a clear distinction being made by the president that the targets that the military would attack would be carefully chosen, would be discerning, that they would be related to the military capacity of the country, and that they would, of course, go out of their way to avoid civilian targets, areas, and infrastructure. And I just didn't hear that. There was a question, I think, from a reporter asking him specifically about that.
Yeah.
And whether indeed the U.S. military would make this clear distinction. And his answer was vague. His answer was not clear. Now, my hope, so that really worries me. I mean, I've lived in Tehran. There are two Irans. There is an Iran which is being ruled by really a fanatic, repressive, dictatorial regime which is holding the majority of the Iranian population hostage. But there is an Iran of 80, 90 million people who have extremely well-developed institutions. Iran is held as one of the highest performing public health bureaucracies in the entire Middle East. It provides wonderful public health services. Now, these aren't part of the repressive apparatus, but they are hospitals, they are the training grounds for all the nurses and so on and so forth. And similarly, in terms of transportation and networks and all the other things which are the everyday life of a country. So I would have hoped to see a greater discernment and, let's say, insistence that, of course, we will try to do that. Now, having said that, I am a professor of international relations, so I do have to have a very realist hat, unemotional hat. Two things come to mind, which I hope to be the case. One is that this is a kind of bluster. This is a kind of exaggerated rhetoric, a kind of hyperbole that President Trump has used, and he's used it before about blowing North Korea into smithereens or whatever it is. And so I think there is some of that, and I hope that doesn't lead into military targets. The second point I would make, and this is a sort of hard-nosed analysis, is that, in fact, the question of infrastructure, and I am assuming the military is taking this very seriously, is that it depends on what kind of infrastructure. That is to say, some dual-use civilian targets are actually permitted under the laws of war. And that's something we can talk about more later.
Absolutely, more later. It does require intense study. Military lawyers very much have to be involved in that. It's not something the president is supposed to decide by social media posts. I will note that the Iranian Red Crescent reports that 67,000 civilian sites, more than 67,000 civilian sites, have already been struck, including schools, health facilities. There's the bridge that the president himself has bragged about, essentially. A music school was struck the other day. Peter, I want to go to you on this. You're hearing Kian describe the bluster, and he's very much right that is sort of a routine with the president, not necessarily a surprise from him in a press conference like this. But I do have to wonder, you also hear from the veterans that Alex Tabet spoke to, including one who voted for him 3 times, that this is not playing well with them. Politically, for Republicans, both down the ballot who are going to have to defend what we're hearing from the president today, what he may do tomorrow, and the continued ramifications domestically that may come, how they are metabolizing all of this and what they're supposed to do with it.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, look, the president likes to talk tough. He likes to beat his chest. As Candace said, it's possible this is just bluster, and the professional military wouldn't go along with, things that are explicitly war crimes. Remember, this is the dispute, though, that he had with those 6 members of Congress who put out a video last year reminding the armed forces that you're not supposed to obey illegal orders. He tried to prosecute them, the president did, tried to prosecute them for stating the law as it currently stands. That got thrown out of court because there's no basis for criminally prosecuting people for that. But that shows you where the president's mind says. Now, the officers around him, the generals around him, they know the difference between a war crime and what's not a war crime. And the question becomes, how much is this bluster? How much does this become a confrontation with those officers? We don't know what's happening. The conversation's happening between the Pentagon and the White House right now. We do know the Secretary of Defense just fired the Army Chief of Staff. We don't know exactly why. We've had some reporting suggesting some possibilities there about promotions and interference and so forth. But, what we have is a uniformed military officer corps leadership that is very devoted to following the laws of war, because they spent their entire careers learning them and incorporating them into their ethos. And I think that's a little of what you heard in that hall today from those interviews. These are people who in the military, when they were there, they were taught the laws of war. They were taught they had to obey them. And they were taught to obey them not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because we want other people to obey the laws of war when it comes to our troops. If that airman had been captured, we wouldn't count on Iran to follow the laws of war, but we would at least have the high ground to say, you have to follow the laws of war, and if you don't, you will pay a price. If we're seen as violating the laws of war at the same time, I've heard military people talk about this all the time, we lose the ability to demand fair treatment, legal treatment of our own people.